All right, Todor. I know we talked a little bit before, and you like your resume is like really, really impressive. Hmm. So can you like introduce yourself a little bit?
Absolutely. My name is Todor Pandov, and I'm the head strength and conditioning coach for the Orlando Magic. Um, I'm starting my 20th year in the field of performance. Um, and I was at the college level for about 10 years, and then I've been in the NBA for the last 10. So, um, I don't know how deep you want to go into it, or yeah, I don't know if you want to ask me some questions, or do you want me to start from the day one, or how do you want to do this?
All right, so first of all, like what are like what are the difference between let's say college level and pro setting?
Oh yeah. Well, at the college level, obviously you get younger kids, athletes that are very talented. The level of the culture is a little bit different. The level to which you can do stuff with college athletes is a little bit different. There's a little bit more control over what you can do with college athletes. The thing about it is that I did it, started 20 years ago at the college level, and I left 10 years ago. So I know the college level has changed a lot in the last 3 or 4 years, really since COVID. A lot of my friends have been telling me how it's changing in a way with NIL and all that stuff. So I can't speak to what it is like right now, but back when I first started at the college level, um, there was a little bit you could program, and you could do a lot more. Um, you had a lot more control over the athletes. Um, Back then. So I really can't speak to how college is in today's world, but um, that's how college was. In the NBA, obviously, you work with the best athletes in the world, and a lot of the times those athletes are a little bit older. They've done a lot of things. They've played for a lot of teams. They've had a lot of different strength and conditioning coaches. They've had a lot of different experiences. Um, they um, they know their bodies really really well. They're a lot of them are perfectionists. um they have a great feel for how they're feeling at that particular moment in time, and they really really know their own body. So you really have to listen to them a lot, and there's a lot more of a feedback that you get um at the pro level, just because athletes just that they're some of the best in the world, and they have a great feel for what their body is like at that particular time. So there's a lot of back and forth at the pro level in terms of like what we are doing and how much input those guys have on their own strength and conditioning programs.
Nice. So I know like you've been at like Philadelphia Sixers for like almost 7 years, and the last 2 years with it was with Orlando Magic. So uh for like almost 10 years in like NBA, like I'll like for the past 10 years, how do you feel like our field kind of change, or like does like the culture of like strength training kind of change in the NBA for the last 10 years?
I don't know if the culture has changed in the last 10 years. The strength and conditioning and performance in general really goes through waves, um, based on, um, sadly to say, based on fads that people see, especially in today's world with Instagram and social media. There's a lot of places where people can see workouts, and a lot of people post certain exercises, and it's a lot more fad driven than fact driven. And so, um, what I've seen lately is how things are kind of changing based on like if somebody's really popular on Instagram, posting certain things, and they become really popular, and that's what kind of drives a lot of the young people in the business. Some for the good, some for the bad, but this performance world in general kind of goes in cycles. Like when I first started uh 20 years ago, really really sexy word was the core. Everybody wanted to train the core, and but nobody really could define what the core was. Everybody had a different definition of what the core is, and then he moved on to function. Everybody wanted to be a functional strength and conditioning coach, and again, nobody really could define what function was, but everybody was doing all these functional exercises. um, some people were better, some people were not, some people just copy like always, but you really have to understand function to actually be able to prescribe it. And now a big piece is like sports science and wearable technology and sports tech. um, and that drives performance in a certain direction as well. And again, a lot of it is good. Some of it is you have to know what you're getting into. Um, and But I think it's always about the ability to understand um, the waves in which the performance world is going in, and having the understanding of what you can get out of it and what's good and what's not, so you can kind of draw from um, and whatever fits best for you. And so it's changed. It kind of keeps going back and forth on a lot of things. But the one thing that always remains constant is the fact that the body adapts to the demands that you place on it. And so strength training, a good, sound, strong strength training program always remains really, really good for the development of athletes and for the maintenance of athletes. So that never changes.
Cool, cool. So, uh, you kind of mentioned that like there's every once in a while there's gonna be something going on in our field like get popular, and probably right now it's like sports science, maybe like force plate, maybe like GPS, all those stuff. So, uh, like before force plate, before like GPS, how do you? I know like some of you guys probably like use session RPE to like to maybe like just record like the training volume, and today is like GPS. So like what kind of metrics do you guys track when it comes to like GPS?
Well, we I'm gonna do it in a way where we only talk about some of the stuff that we can talk about. Uh, but we track some of them. Probably the most common ones that everybody tracks in terms of GPS is distance covered, total distance, extreme high speed distance, accelerations, decelerations, um, jumps. In the past, we've done full court transitions, and you can really design. Connexon is what we use. You can really design. You can pick the parameters of what constitutes like a acceleration and deceleration, and what's extreme high speed distance. For us is above 14.5 miles. But you can really kind of design the metrics in the way you see fit best for you. But those are some of the most common metrics that Connexon and Second Spectrum gives us. Now that we moved into Hawkeye, we're going to have a different understanding of a little bit more detailed understanding of what our athletes are going in during games. But in terms of the metrics that we track, they're some of them are what everybody else does, and some of them are some that we kind of do for ourselves that really makes sense for our own team. You know.
Yeah, yeah. So, uh, the other thing besides like force rate metric, sorry, GPS metrics, I want to start by asking like, I know Adam kind of brought this up to me like a few months ago. He said like you kind of have your own way of like programming lift during the season, because I know some teams gonna use like game day lift, and Adam kind of mentioned that you kind of have your own thoughts on like programming during the system. Can you like talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Well, in terms of programming, um, there's so many different variables that go into programming. You know, you have to consider number one, the age of the player that you're training. You know, you have in this league, you have guys that are entering the league at the age of 19. And you also have guys that are well over 30 in the upper 30s. And so the guys that are a little bit older in age, they've done a whole lot of things in their lifetime, and you have to be treating them a little bit differently than a younger player who is still in the developmental phase of training. And so you have to consider age when it comes to programming. You have to consider uh, is the player in a developmental phase, or is he in more of a maintenance phase, or is he in more of a um, like an older player phase? You have to also see what kind of position they play. What are some of the things that you look into training a guard, a point guard, or a wing player, or a big man or a forward? What are some of the aspects and some of the things that are valuable for that particular position? You really have to look into deficiencies, how their bodies move, what are they able to do, and what are some of the things that they're not so great at. You have to consider those things when you're programming a program. A big part of it is you have to consider during the season. You have to consider load in terms of, well, how much are they doing? You know, how much are they playing? You know, minutes is good, but you also look at all the metrics that we're doing, and you have to be able to evaluate based on what they're doing on the court, then how much you load them in the weight room to be able to support their system. And so when you combine all these different variables, you come up with a workout that is basically under the umbrella of, you know, training for the game of basketball. And so it gets the more and more you dig into it, the more and more complicated it gets. But obviously, it makes sense for us, and the guys have been really successful with it. That's why I think it's so funny. Um, every single exercise is great for somebody. But just because you see um, a video on Instagram of somebody doing something, you don't necessarily have to copy it for yourself. You have to really always ask yourself the question, why? Why are they doing something with that particular athlete? And understanding function, understanding where players are in that particular time, understanding all these different variables, uh, that's how you kind of construct and make up a strength and conditioning program for that particular player for that particular time in season. Obviously, we look at what they've done in the past, but you also look at what they have up ahead. In the NBA, gets really, really tricky because you play 82 games and you basically average 3.5 games a week. And so a lot of the times, sometimes you get to play 4 games in 5 days. Sometimes you get to play 6 games in 9 days, and so on and so forth. So it becomes really tricky. And what's important at that particular time for that particular person, and it gets you know, that's where the art of knowing science is. You know what I mean? Um, science is great because it tells us all these things that we can track, and but then based on knowing the science, you have to be able to understand, and you have to be able to apply that science to how you construct and how you design strength and conditioning programs. And I think that's where the art is, because every single thing that we do in terms of measuring, it gives us a story, but none of it is um, black and white. I think the force plates are great. They give us a great story of how the players are pushing into the ground, and gives us a great data into it. Then he also, you have to take that in consideration, but you also have to consider the fact that their hands are on their hips and that they're only going vertical. When in the game of basketball, you have to have a lot of horizontal displacement as well. And so you take what the force plate gives you in terms of numbers, but that's not the only thing. Like, you take what the Kinexon gives you for that particular time, but that's not the only thing. You also see how players are moving. You also sometimes somebody might get hit on a screen and they're just basically extremely sore from that hit, which is a contusion. So you have to take that in consideration. And so you have all these variables that you have to, as a practitioner, you have to read into and make sense of all of them. So nothing is really black and white. Nothing is like, okay, the force plate says this, so then that means we have to do that. You have to always read into what that means for that particular time and moment. So it's really an art of juggling and understanding all the different sciences of performance in order to be able to design a strength and conditioning program.
Cool, cool. And I want to dive a little bit deeper into this because I know uh Adam kind of mentioned this, like besides like game day lift, you kind of lift at like the at like uh game day plus one. Am I correct? So
You could, yeah, you could. Depends on the player, depends on the time, depends on the demands. Yeah.
so would like how would you say like um if I'm not doing game day lift, if lifting at the next day, how would that benefit me as a player?
Well, I don't know. That only matters again, like when you deal with so many different variables, everything's gonna um, affect everything else. And so again, like, it starts with who you are, what your body is like, how your body functions, what your deficiencies are, um, how you're being used within our team. Are you a guy that plays major minutes? What have we done in the last 2 weeks, and what do we have up ahead of us? And so there's so many different variables at that particular moment in time that you have to read into as a strength and conditioning coach, as a performance a coach. There's no way anybody can tell you, hey, you're going to do this on this particular day, and that's how this is going to affect you on 3 days from now. It doesn't really work that way. When I was a little bit of a younger strength and conditioning coach, that's how, we believed everything was linear, and we trained everything in a linear way. But that's not number one. Everybody adapts to the training stimulus differently, and they have their own speed of adaptation. And also, everybody plays differently, everybody trains differently. Some guys come back to get shots up late after practice, late, so that's another stimulus that you have to take in consideration. So not everything is the same, not everybody is the same, and therefore it's not a linear progression. At the end of the day, at the end of the season, as we move into the season, everybody gets better, and we have, obviously you look into the force plate data to guide yourself with whether guys are getting better or not. But you also over time that happens, but in between days, from day to day, you don't linearly progress ever. So not in our world. We don't live in this optimal world. We play so many different games, in a short amount of time that like nothing really is optimal. We just do the best we can with what we've got going at that particular time because an example could be, you know, let's say track and field for the Olympics. You every 4 years you compete, and then you can program things to for you to peak out in 4 years, and it's a cleaner, easier way to do it. But in the game of basketball, you have to peak out 82 times a season, and so how do you do that? There's so many different variables that come into it that it's kind of hard to answer a question unless you're in the thick of it at that particular moment in time. That's why, you know, understanding every single discipline of what we call science is so important because then as a practitioner, that's where the art is, the ability to understand what everything tells you. So therefore you can apply the best strength and conditioning methodology at that particular time, at that particular moment. So it's hard to say.
Man, I like the way you explain it, like understanding all the principles of the science and like manipulate it in your own environment. I like it. I like it.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's where the art is. You always have these things between art and science, and it's never just science and it's never just art. You have to have a great understanding of what the science tells you, but then you have to be able, the art is the ability to draw from what the science gives you in order for you to apply it to the athletes. And that's where better programming, happens.
Nice, nice. So, uh, another topic I want to jump into is like you kind of like uh did a presentation on one of the conference talk about like human movement. So, can you like can you like categorize like what are some like main movement type you're gonna see in basketball? I know in like football they're gonna use like shuffle, crossover, linear speed, max velocity. So is that gonna be like different, or how are you gonna view basketball?
Well, you have to, again, I think in order for you to design good performance programs, you have to have a great understanding of how the body functions, how the body is designed, and how it functions. Right. So the body is designed to function in three planes of motion. The body is designed to function in the sagittal plane, which is forward and back. The body is designed to function in the frontal plane, which is right lateral, left lateral, sideways, everything to the side. And the body is designed to function in the transverse plane, which is right and left rotational, and any combination in between those. So we know that the body is designed to function that way. That's not a secret. We've known that for a long time. Um, Strangely enough, the game of basketball is played in three planes of motion, and so it only makes sense for us to design strength training programs that are three-dimensional. Um, we know that the body functions in an upright position. We know that the body functions as an integrated unit, like meaning that when the body is integrated, meaning that like what happens at what one part of my body directly affects what happens to the rest of my body, because it's all connected. You know, we know that the body functions in an upright position in the game of basketball. There's other sports where that's not the case. In swimming, in particular, you're in the water. You basically are laying horizontal to the ground in a water which is a different surface. So that doesn't apply to that. You have rowing, in which you're sitting, and you have cycling, in which you're sitting on a bike. But in the game of basketball, we function in an upright position. Um, what's interesting when you function in an upright position is that first of all, you parallel to the ground. If the ground is here, you're parallel to the ground. And so gravity affects you differently than if you're like in a horizontal position. So that's one thing that happens. The other thing that happens is when you're in an upright position, your foot is the first part of the body that touches the ground. So then we know that the body is an integrated unit. and the foot is the first part of the body that touches the ground. And so whatever happens at the foot, because the body is an integrated unit, is directly going to affect everything going up from the foot, the ankle, the tibia, the femur, the hip, the pelvis, the spine, T-spine, cervical spine, all the way up to the extremities. So um, we have to understand how that affects everything. Um, and so then you get into you know, we have to understand fascia when we talk about the integration of the body, how the body is integrated. You have to understand the fascial system. You have to understand tensegrity, the model of tensegrity, which is tensional integrity. Um, we have to know how important fascia is to everything that we do. It's such a big organ of the body that's for a long time nobody has ever studied until recently. It's kind of like a hot topic, which is really fascinating. And then obviously we have to know the proprioceptive system, and then based on that, so knowing how the body is designed to function and knowing how, and then knowing what the game of basketball is like. What is the game of basketball? Well, it's a sport. It's a three-dimensional sport. You have to be able to, it's a quick, fast change of direction sport. You have to be able to accelerate, decelerate, change direction, and accelerate again. Um, it's a quick burst of energy sport. You have to be able to get exerted, and then you have to be able to recover fast and get exerted again. Um, it's an overhead sport because the basket is 10 feet, and so whoever is stronger over their head has an advantage. So um, the funny thing is when I put my hands over my head, all of a sudden um, the core has to get really rigid to be able to support my function overhead. Do we train that? Yes. How do we do it? Multiple different ways. Is it, how important is it? It's crucial because the game is an overhead game. And so understanding function, understanding how the body's designed, how it moves, understanding the game of basketball, and then you come up with the functional movement patterns. We have a squat, we can three-dimensionalize a squat. We can squat in the sagittal plane, we can squat in the frontal plane, we can squat in the transverse plane. Obviously, load, obviously plane of motion would dictate my load, meaning that like if I'm in the sagittal plane squat, I'm not going to be able to squat 500 pounds the same way I do when I'm symmetrically in, with my feet shoulder width apart, toes slightly toed out, so understanding that part, that like a plane of motion would dictate my load. I'm not going to be able to squat heavy if I'm going in the frontal plane of a squat. So then we have a lunge. A lunge is another functional movement pattern. We can train the lunge. We could three-dimensionalize the lunge. We have a pivot, it's kind of basically two lunges or two steps put together. We can three-dimensionalize that. We have a jump. In our language, we consider a jump when you leave the ground from 2 feet and you land on to those 2 feet. We can three-dimensionalize that. We got a hop in which you leave the ground from 1 foot and land on the same foot. Can we make it three-dimensional? Yes, of course we can. And then we have a leap when you leave the ground from 1 foot and land on the opposite foot. Can we three-dimensionalize that? Absolutely. And so you get all these functional movement patterns. Again, like it's the whole umbrella of the whole thing, like understanding function, how the body is designed, how it moves, um, knowing that everything moves in three planes of motion, loading those movement patterns that we just talked about. I think that's the key.
Cool, cool. So you brought up fascia, and like you mentioned, like it is really a big top hot topic right now. So maybe can you like share a little bit your thoughts on like how to train the fascia?
Well, how deep do we want to go? This is it's such a fascinating subject. It's I think first you have to understand what fascia is. and what fascia does. Fascia is a connective substance that surrounds everything in our body. It surrounds all of our organs. Um, but I guess if you take it more specifically for what we do, we got to talk about bone, tendon, ligament, and muscle. So then when you talk about how does fascia, where is fascia in those places? Well, fascia surrounds every single fascicle. It surrounds every single muscle fiber. It surrounds every single muscle. It surrounds the whole extremity. So there's like different layers of fascia that are all within um, the area of training. And so what happens is um, you have this little, if you look at it, you have this little cotton candy like substance that's in between every tissue in your body. And what happens sometimes if we don't move, um, that cotton candy, which is fascia, it becomes a little gluey. It becomes very, it kind of sticks together. So it makes those two different tissues kind of stick to each other. And the more you don't move, what is the one of the basic things that we do in today's society? We sit a lot. We sit in offices, we sit on couches, we sit in our car, and so we don't move. And so what happens is fascia, what I call it, it gunks up. It becomes like a gunk, all that little fuzz that is like a cotton candy like substance. It doesn't get hydrated, it doesn't move, so it becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. Well, it's really important for us to what I call hydrate the fascia, meaning that that little fuzz that's between all the little tissues. We have to make it from a cotton candy like substance to like this to this like a snotty lubricant substance. And the way you do that, you do it by movement, you do it with some soft tissue work, you do it by movement, but you have to get it to where like it becomes viscoelastic. It becomes like really really wet and lubricated surface. So that would give you the ability to actually have all of your tissues slide and glide on top of each other. Um, you have to understand fascia in the way that fascia has this viscoelastic properties in which if you can rely on fascia to spring you. If you train the fascia ballistically, it acts like a rubber band. You pull it fast and you release, and it goes really really fast. That's the elastic property of the fascia. But also fascia also has a property in which, like, if you stretch a certain segment and you hold it there, fascia kind of adapts to that length, and then you lose the elasticity. So you have to understand what fascia does in order to train it. But usually um, in sport, you want to make the fascia elastic, and you want to train it to give you extra spring. Um, but you also want it to be pliable. So how do you do that? Well, you do it again differently with every athlete. So I mean, that's such a big concept that like we can spend 10 hours on a podcast just talking about it. I suggest, your viewers look into a lot of the work of uh, Thomas Myers has done it over 50 years. Carla Stecco out of Italy has done it for a long, long time. Robert Schleip from Germany has some great, great researches, some books on fascia. Um, Dave Lucendic, he lives in Pittsburgh. He's done an amazing job. He has a book. Um, Bill Parisi actually is starting to really speak on fascia lately. He wrote a book as well. And I went to listen to one of his, he was at a conference that I spoke in recently. He was really, really good. So I suggest some of your viewers look into some of those sources. They're great sources. And it's a new topic, but we can spend hours and hours on it. But it's really, really important for understanding how the body functions.
Nice, nice, nice. So, another question about like fascia. This is probably a really stupid one. People can hate me for asking this, but still,
There's no stupid questions.
but still, like, since we're talking about fascia and there's like so many like fascia line, like are we able to like just target one specific fascia line at a time during training? Like,
Well, when you look at how the body's integrated, um, and how it functions, you can never really isolate one line. One of the things about fascia is that it's omnidirectional, which means that it doesn't have a direction in which it functions. It's omnidirectional, which is again, it kind of fits in with everything that we're doing because we focus on omnidirectional training. We focus on three-dimensional training, and again, strangely enough, fascia is omnidirectional, meaning that there's no direction in which it pulls. It only again, this is what I would say, that the body again adapts to the demands that you place on it. And so knowing that the fascia is omnidirectional, if you start training only in one plane, which is the most traditional strength training programs, you would lay down collagen only in that one plane of motion, um, which is basic mechanotransduction, right? Like the body lays down collagen based on the demands you place on it. So if you're only training one plane of motion, you become really robust in that one. The body builds tissue in that one certain line, but then when the moment you come out of it, you're not so robust, right? So what I would say to that is that knowing that the fascia is omnidirectional, um, therefore we should really design performance protocols to stress fascia in all directions possible to make it more robust.
cool, cool. And uh I know this probably like coincide with some of the concept of like fascia, and you kind of mentioned this already, but like I know you guys kind of use the word like vertical core. So can you explain like what is exactly is vertical core?
Well, vertical core was developed by one of my mentors, Todd Wright. Um, I interned with Todd early in my career. When I got to the University of Texas, I started with Todd Wright. Um, he developed this system, vertical core and training, which was brilliant. Up to that point, everybody was training the core horizontally on the ground, which is great. There's an on-ground function that we can do as well. Um, and when you look at evolution of people, we before we start walking, we crawl, right? And what happens to us when we crawl? We develop the core tremendously. We're down on the ground on all fours, two arms, two legs, and we do the cross crawl action, which kind of develops. We do that for a few months. You start as a baby. The normal evolution is you start rolling on your side, and then when you roll on your stomach, you start kind of scooting back and forward, and you start moving. If there's a toy close to you, you kind of scoot yourself up to the toy, and then you learn how to move, and then you get on your hands and on your knees, and you start moving. So you develop this cross crawl action, and what happens during that period of time between that and when you start walking is you develop your core develops, but it's in a horizontal fashion. But then when we start walking, we get up in an upright position. And so what happens in an upright position, gravity hits us differently. So you always have to look at, you know, what I would call the physical principles and the biological principles we talked about earlier, how my body moves and how the body's integrated and how, the body functions in an upright position. And you have all these things that we talked about earlier. But the things that we didn't talk about earlier was the physical principles. You got gravity, which pulls you down. I don't care who you are, gravity always pulls you down towards Earth. You have ground reaction forces, which are, from the bottom up. And then you have mass and momentum. As I start moving in a certain direction, my mass and momentum's kind of carrying me in that direction. And so I have all these physical principles that are given to me, all these physical things that are given to me for free by our environment, which is gravity that always pulls me down. I got ground reaction forces from the bottom up, and then I have massive momentum that I have to constantly fight. I have a lot of things that I constantly have to overcome just because we live on the planet Earth. And so understanding that the body functions in an upright position with my feet on the ground, understanding that gravity and massive momentum and ground reaction forces hit me kind of like plays different forces on me when I'm in an upright position with my feet on the ground versus when I'm horizontal to the ground. Um, Knowing that I have to function in an upright position, then we have to develop exercises which are in an upright position. And so that's how the vertical core training system came about. The Todd, it was all Todd that created it. He's with the Los Angeles Clippers right now. It's his creation, but we've all used it. But basically, it originated from being in an upright position, playing our sport in an upright position, how our physical principles affect our body in an upright position, the ability to overcome external forces in an upright position, the ability to handle our own body in an upright position. That's how the vertical core system started.
Cool, cool. And uh does it also coincide with what you kind of mentioned that when you do all those movement you do with 3D, like add a 3D component into like every movement you train?
The vertical core?
Yeah, yeah. Does the concept kind of like coincide to each other?
Absolutely. And the interesting thing is that um, a thing that I call functional driven specificity, which is it's starting to get a little bit complicated. But when you think about it, um, function is driven from the bottom up because I'm in an upright position with my feet on the ground. So ground reaction forces are pushing me from the bottom up. And I also function is also driven from the top down based on what I do with my hands. And so function is driven from the bottom up and from the top down. Well, we talked about the planes of motion. You got the sagittal plane in which we move in two directions. We got the frontal plane in which we move in two directions. We got the transverse plane, two directions. That's six. That's six from the bottom up. We also have six from the top down based on what I do with my hands. And so now I have six multiply six, which is 36. I have 36 different ways in which I can affect my core from the bottom up and from the top down. But when you think about it, I'm not done yet because we have in sync and out of sync. So multiply that by two. And so we have all these different ways in which the body functions from the bottom up and from the top down. And if we're smart, we want to train all of them. Now, can you do it all in one day? No, but you can pick little bits and pieces and throw little bits and pieces into every workout. And over time, you kind of like cover a whole scheme of things. But it gets a little more complicated. But when you really think about it, you just have to think about bottom up, top down, three different planes, six directions, and every combination between all these planes of motion and directions, and you can train all those if
Nice.
that makes sense.
Yeah, of course, of course. I like your stuff. I mean, I talked to Gio, shout out to Gio. He's like, and he was there at the conference you did, and he was like, your stuff is all amazing, and it's kind of the same that I'm not gonna say all the same, but a lot of it is probably similar with what Adam teaches us, which is very awesome.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I'll tell you what, like when you're at a conference and you have 1 hour to speak, and it's hard to really get after every single aspect of what you want to get out. But I guess you try to hit some of the major principles and let strength and conditioning coaches run wild with the ideas you kind of give them, because everybody's good at something. And I think if you just kind of explain some movement, how the body functions and how it moves, everybody's able to create and take it on from there and make it their own.
Nice, nice, nice. I think, although I still have some question for you, but like the timing is there, so I'm gonna let you go. Okay,
Okay, sounds great. No, I mean, we got maybe another 5 or 10 minutes if you want to keep rolling.
it's okay. I'm gonna let you go.
All right, sounds good. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, man. I'm gonna reach out to you again. Okay,
Okay, sounds good.
see you.
See you.